is I don't need, and I think most people don't need to know how to cope with happiness.
Mm,
But art,
yeah.
when dealing with death and heartbreak and depression and all these other secret battles that we deal with or public battles we deal with,
Hmm.
that's what art helps us through. What do we connect with musically? We connect with a song at a pretty down point in our life. Some of the songs that stick most in my mind.
All right,
So,
welcome back to Vanguard Conversations, episode five, six, seven. I don't know. I stopped. I'm a music major, so I can count to four and divide by two, and that's about it. I am here with Kyle Manor, engineer and producer based out of Nashville. His credits list is a lot of fantastic modern Nashville artists, and some older ones. You have Bob Seger, you have Sheryl Crow, you have Dierks Bentley, you have Brad Paisley. The literally the TV show Nashville is on your credits. So thank you for joining us for these few minutes, and
yeah,
appreciate your time, dude. I know you're busy.
yeah. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
People will notice your background's blurred out. You want to tell them why?
Well, we moved about 2 years ago. Yeah, about 2 years ago at this point. Still in the process. Started day one, still working on getting the studio up and running. So, temporary treatment, got some painter's tape on the wall, showing me where the studs are behind my multiple layers of drywall. So, it's not pretty. It works.
That's why
You
it's
got to know the
audio, right?
room. Yeah.
Do, now, what was kind of the impetus for going from, because you worked out of a studio in what, like Berry Hill area for years and
Hmm.
years, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I started there as an intern and just kind of never left. It was my main spot. I tracked it. I always say wherever somebody wants to make a record. So a bunch of different studios around town, but I kind of had one spot where I always worked for about 20 years. So yeah, like I said, did my internship there, got hired on about halfway through it. Once I graduated, went full time, and yeah, spent so much of my career there. But yeah, moving out of there to a smaller space or home studio, it was just about, I've seen so many changes in the industry in Nashville. Specifically, when I started in the studio I started working in, we did a lot of songwriter demos for publishers. So, just like artists make records, these songwriters got to get in and cut their songs. And in Nashville, the standards are pretty high. So we're cutting full band stuff. We're usually not just doing just like a guitar vocal or something like that. So just saw it going through a bunch of different changes, and budgets just started getting lower and lower. And to mix in a like full tracking studio was either kind of untenable for budgets, or I was just not making anything because all the money was going to the studio. If you're doing like per song rates, a lot of stuff have switched to that kind of per song rate, especially with mixing.
Mhm.
Um, so it's, I kind of had to, if I wanted to make money, I kind of had to get out of there and stop giving my money to somebody else.
So it was a business decision, although admittedly the
Yeah,
commute's much nicer when you roll out of bed and get a
it
cup of
is.
coffee.
It is. With this second version of my studio, because our old place had a small mix production space. I've got a vocal booth in this one, and when we were searching for houses, I really wanted a larger studio space for hopefully an ISO booth, if not a room big enough where I could do a vocal in the room with me. But that's when you talk about the commute, that's been something that's really been frustrating over the years, is because I'm still between here and these other studios. And so with Nashville booming and the traffic, it's just so inefficient where, because again, with songwriter demos, we've moved to this one-off concept where when I first started, a songwriter, when they had 5 songs they wanted to cut, you come into the studio, we track them all in the morning, vocals in the afternoon, BGVs in the evening, mix all the next day. 5 songs out the door in 2 days. Now it's just like if you got one song, you cut it. And so you're getting all these songs from a bunch of different locations, tracked at different times, different kind of production concepts behind them. So you're usually just kind of doing one song at a time. So it's like getting ready for a session, showering, commuting, getting there early, prepping the session, doing the session. I spend an hour doing a vocal, and I'm, commuting home. I'm invested like 4 hours into it now. And so it's,
Mhm.
again, a business decision. It's like, man, this is so inefficient. It's like I'm almost losing money at this point if I can
Yeah.
only do like a vocal or two a day. And then by the time I get home, not a lot of time left to do much else. So another thing with this vocal booth, it'll force people to come. Well, not force people, but people have the option of coming to me, cheaper studio rates, more efficiency for me. And again, just like then I charge for the studio a lot
Mhm.
less than other studios because I'm not trying to make a profit. I just need to cover a little bit of cost. And
Yeah, you don't have to charge, to cover your rent and electricity and
yeah,
all that. Like that's all,
mm,
it's almost like it's all built into your house budget
yeah,
already. So it's
yeah,
your overhead I mean, most of your overhead is like you said, a boatload of drywall and Owens
yeah,
Corning and all the stuff
hmm
that it takes to build out a room where you can do all this in.
yeah,
And if something else is going on in the house or, somebody's getting a delivery next door, you don't hear it.
yeah. That was the deal with this place. The old place, I just put some treatment up on a wall, but when
Mhm.
we moved in here, I stripped it down to subfloors and studs, and so far just tried to do the best I can with the existing room. That's the floor isn't isolated, but
Mhm.
as far as like isolating the rafters, but I've got some pretty thick insulation. I got a couple layers of OSB and some stall mat, like thick rubber that they use in horse stalls,
Mhm.
to just kind of deaden it, and 2 layers of drywall, green glue, some insulation in the walls, and then insulation on the wall. And the doors, these doors have been an ordeal, man. Trying to find like studio quality doors that
Mhm.
just don't break the bank.
Yeah.
Because I my whole career I've worked in professional commercial studios, and so my standards are high both for performance of the materials but also the aesthetics of them. And
Mhm.
a lot of the studios around here have these like wood doors with the glass in them, and they're beautiful. They block the sound, but you still get line of sight, which is important.
Mhm.
So, but man, those are so expensive, and it
Yeah.
took me about 6 months to actually find some. And I didn't find them until I was actually searching. I was going to build my own. I've got a client. He's a musician, but he's also a really good carpenter and contractor. He's done some work around my house. He did some work at the old studio, like refinished the wood on an old Trident console, and
Oh, that's cool.
um, he was just going to build me a door. I was going to design it, just kind of like how I thought it should come together, and he was going to build it for me. So I started just searching and sourcing um, soundproof glass. And by doing that is where I found this a couple companies, but one in particular that just like I guess they were getting swallowed up by the algorithm, the search algorithm, and
Mhm.
sponsors or something like that, because their doors are much more affordable. They're not $10,000 like some of them are,
Yeesh.
and so they're still still pricey. But that's the thing too. Everybody's like, just get a good exterior door, but their sound rating sucks and
Yeah.
look good. It
Yeah.
looks like an exterior door in the middle of your home,
Mhm.
and it's still like interior doors. The sound rating, I don't know the numbers, but basically nothing. I think exterior doors are usually like whatever the rating is, but like 60 or 70,
Mhm.
which still just isn't much.
Yeah. I mean, like our
Especially
doors
when
in
you're
our house are all hollow core interior doors,
yeah,
and you can hear
yeah,
a fly crawling on the other side of the
yeah,
door sometimes, I swear,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Especially for those of us who are trained to like listen for the minutia and get distracted by those things.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, and you're still paying like for a good looking and good quality exterior door. You're still you know four figures.
Mhm.
1,000 to $3,000 anyway. So why not spend a little extra and get a door that you can't hear through.
So did you do most of the work yourself, or did you hire contractors for it?
Most of it myself. I've had a lot of help and input for sure. My my father-in-law, also a great carpenter. He's a mechanical engineer by trade, but grew up doing construction and just like master carpenter. We have some of his furniture in our house, and
Oh, that's awesome.
um, he built the house, like literally built the house that my wife grew up in, by himself. He'd had somebody come over and help him hoist a framed up wall, but he from the from the frame to the cabinets inside. So he helped out a lot, um, especially the muscle for the stall mats. You're talking like I think they're 4x6. They're about close to 100 pounds a piece.
Oh
So you
my
get a
gosh.
100 pound just like sheet that is pliable and moves around. Really tested. So yeah, and then I had a couple engineers in town, um, kind of advise me on some ideas for it. One of them gave me the ideas for the stall mats, and um,
That's a new one.
so
I've
yeah,
never
just
heard
kind
of
of
that instead of that
it,
really expensive vinyl roll, you know?
that's the thing. Yeah, mass loaded vinyl is kind of common. He says, and this makes sense too. Um, Mass loaded vinyl is really intended to be free hanging.
Hmm.
That's where it's most effective. Obviously, just like if you wedge it between two surfaces, it can still, density is good for blocking sound, but um, it works best when you hang it. Like if you're doing a wall, you can hang it like a curtain, and that's where it's really effective, but also very expensive because I was going to do that.
Hmm.
And he's like, just do stall mats. Go to Tractor Supply, and I don't even remember the price, but pretty,
Probably cheaper than
pretty,
mass loaded
pretty
vinyl
cheap,
though.
pretty affordable. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like people aren't going to pay a lot of money for mats that their horses are going to step on and
Yeah.
go to the bathroom on and all that stuff. So
Well, and some
yeah,
clients, maybe you
yeah,
should have left
yeah,
the stall mats on the top.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then a shout out to my wife. She did most of the drywall in here.
Oh, that's
Um,
incredible because that's my least favorite thing to do. I hire people out for
Same.
drywall when I do home projects. I'm like, my shoulders are both torn from hockey. I don't want to
Hmm.
hang drywall. It's
Yeah, yeah,
miserable. It's such an awful process.
yeah. Luckily, we didn't have to do any ceiling stuff. I've never done drywall on the ceiling, which
It
is feels
sucks.
so
Don't do
miserable.
it. I did it once, never again. Yeah.
But yeah, we did the walls. Her dad helped. I did some of it. I did a lot of the hanging, and my
Mhm.
wife Anya did a lot of the hanging, but she did all the mudding, and she taught. We had another project going on that she taught herself drywall because she got impatient about trying to find a drywaller to come in. So she taught herself drywall, and so if you
So
need
she did
somebody,
the
I got a
mudding and
girl.
taping because that's like such a
Hmm.
precision thing,
Hmm. Yeah.
Vanguard Conversations is now a construction podcast, by the way. We're just going to talk about nominal versus actual dimensions on lumber from here on out if you guys want to bail.
Mhm.
You learn anything from building the studio that you're like, "Oh man, I did not expect this or that." I'm sure you have 1,000 of them, but try and pick one or two.
Um, I mean, I kind of wish I'd hired out a little bit more to get
Mhm.
this process going, and I'm definitely to the point now where it's just treatment at this point, and
Mhm.
that's really like I'm not going to hire an acoustics design company because that is super pricey. This is a small room. There's
Mhm.
kind of not much you can do in here. So it's definitely kind of to the point where I feel like I've got to do all the work myself.
Mhm.
But we probably could have moved along a little quicker if I had hired out from. Yeah, I don't know that I really have learned anything just that was unexpected. Um, dealing with some of this stuff in the wall. Like I said, it's an existing house,
Oh
and where
yeah,
this is
I'm familiar
located,
with those problems. Yeah.
where it's located now. It's a new house, so not a lot of like janky plumbing and wiring that has been redone over the years. But both of the walls behind me just have a lot of electrical and plumbing in them, and so it's like I opened them up, and not much I could do inside there.
Mhm.
And then I'm sitting there. I'm an overthinker, so I'm just like, man, that PVC pipe in there. That's going to affect the sound reduction quality of this section of the wall, and then is it worth it to do the whole wall? And after I got everything closed up, I did discover some products that you can wrap pipes and electrical boxes to um, help make them more soundproof.
Well, that's for your next studio.
Yeah, yeah. It's the guy who was in here helping me just with a bunch of ideas. Um, he brought up the point. It's just like, making a room soundproof is like making it watertight. So you can reinforce everything, but if you got one little crack, then
That's all it takes. Yep.
that's where the sound's going to go.
Yep. Yep.
So
It's it's the magic of air propagation.
mhm, mhm.
It's gonna find that one little spot.
Yeah.
So let's go back in time. Let's get in the Wayback Machine. Let's go to young, beardless Kyle. Um, and what how did you fall into audio engineering and music in general? Like, what attracted you to music to the point where you ended up where you are now?
A lot of accidents, really. Um,
That's a common theme. You say
yeah.
that and you're like, you say it like it's shocking.
Hmm.
Everybody I've talked to has kind of been like
Yeah.
that.
I got friends in and out of the industry who grew up obsessing over music, maybe more than I did, knowing credits and who did this and who wrote this song,
Mhm.
especially around country music, where who wrote the song is almost as important as who sang it. And it depends on who you're talking to. Sometimes more important. But me, I grew up in kind of a small college town in Northeast Kentucky, and an area rich for music. Eastern Kentucky, a lot of bluegrass. The world's largest bluegrass festival allegedly happens in my hometown. A lot of talent comes out of there. Keith Whitley from that area, Chris Stapleton. Chris Stapleton, he's around my age, but he was delivering pizzas in my hometown when he was in college. um, so a bunch of session musicians I know, they're kind of from that area, but a lot of music history there. But my parents weren't really musical. Didn't really. I wouldn't say house was a musical household. They didn't dislike it, but they just weren't really invested in music. So I just kind of grew up listening to what my dad listened to. My mom was always like CCM. My dad listened to country radio, so that was kind of what I grew up on. And then I have an older brother, who his one of his best friends also had an older brother. So we had this trickle down effect of just like music discovery, where they were into like really heavy stuff at the time, like Megadeth and Pantera. This would have been the
Mhm.
the early 90s. And so that was kind of trickling down to me. And I remember I just wanted to be like my brother. Looked up to him so much. And one morning I was heading to a soccer tournament, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you have any like music you can let me borrow to get me pumped up for the game?" And he gave me three cassette tapes. Didn't have a Walkman back then. Three cassette tapes, and it was Deep Purple's Deepest Purple, which is the greatest hits, Metallica's Black Album, and then Black Sabbath's We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll. And that Black Album, but We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll, just like blew my mind. um, Nothing like I had ever heard. And so really like Black Sabbath, um, just like opened my eyes up to a whole new world of music, and I kind of
Mhm.
became obsessed with them. And my brother was learning to play guitar. He got an SG, like Tony Iommi, um, and I wanted to play guitar. And I had a lot of friends that were musicians. Like, don't play guitar. Everybody plays guitar around here. I knew drums were out of the question. Like, play bass. If you play bass, you'll always have a band. I'm like, okay, that sounds easy. um, so I started playing bass, and Black Sabbath is a good band to be into if you're a bass player, because
Mhm.
some really good, it's a trio, which usually trios require the bass player to do a little more heavy lifting than just kind of rhythm and bottom in. So, yeah, it was kind of that my brother, those tapes, and wanting to be a musician like him, and that's kind of what opened my eyes and started getting me into forms of music. And then with the internet kind of exploding around that time and Napster, um, I was on Napster illegally downloading. Um,
Me too.
yeah,
Don't tell anyone.
uh, but my even before the kind of moral questions came up about it, I didn't quite have the same conflict. I was young, but like the stuff I found that I liked, I went out and bought.
Hmm.
That's how some of my favorite bands today I discovered by pirating their music. And now I've dumped hundreds and maybe thousands of dollars into some of them with CDs and vinyl and concerts and
Hmm.
T-shirts. And that was a really honestly, that was me searching for bands that were like Black Sabbath. So I found like Wolf Mother and Coheed and Cambria, and you know these riff rock bands that did
Hmm.
high pitched vocals, and found a lot of other stuff too. But again, Black Sabbath was kind of like what I was searching for. So just fast forward a little bit, going off to college. I ended up at University of Kentucky doing civil engineering. Um, Music still wasn't on the radar. My dad was a forest ranger. My mom was a school teacher. It's kind of like felt like typical middle class
Hmm.
life. So the concept of being in audio, I just never thought of that. And I did know we had a family friend whose son went to Middle Tennessee State, in the recording program, but I still didn't think much of it. But it was in the back of my mind. I loved AutoCAD. I wanted to build bridges, so I went to UK and was going to do that. And just like really struggled once I got there. I was always a good student, especially in math, um, like math and physics. And then I get there and I have to take chemistry, and literally failed chemistry, never failed a class in my life, and got a D in calc. And I was like, man, I got 4 more years of calculus. I got to pass chemistry. This doesn't feel right. So started
Hmm.
looking into MTSU, and after that first semester, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Had a girlfriend at the time. It was serious. So I was a little reluctant to leave, but I just started taking all the prereqs. Spent 2 years at UK, moved to Middle Tennessee, and once I got there, like right into the recording industry program, and um, yeah, so just kind of felt like I obviously shouldn't be here. I thought I should be building bridges. I thought I should be at UK, but this seems like a sign. Get to MTSU and everything. Math is easy again.
Well,
Uh,
you're building bridges and choruses and verses now, so you really are.
yeah,
You know.
yeah, exactly. Good point. My dog came in here. If you're hearing any
Oh, it's all right.
growling,
My dog's probably going to poke her head in at some point.
this is what
Always,
people are doing.
always happy
Here,
to have a
no,
dog appearance. Oh, hey there.
this is Layla,
Hey, Layla.
little pit bull rescue.
Yeah, my wife and I work for a rescue. We do
Girl.
volunteer. I actually just adopted a dog out 2 nights ago, when I'm very grateful because you would have heard a lot of
Hmm.
barking during this interview. So she was a bit of a talker, that one.
Hmm.
Um, Always happy to have a pet appearance. We've got
Yeah,
cats and
yeah, yeah,
stuff on this, but most of the time the dogs are from me, not from somebody else. So I'm
yeah, yeah.
grateful that it's not just me this time. Um, so I'm curious. What's a We just talked about the business side, but like what's a common mistake you see a lot of people in your area making as far as engineering? Like maybe one mistake related to the craft, maybe one mistake related to the business side of things. Because I think, as you pointed out, we all have to think like businessmen now if we're going to make a living in
Yeah,
the industry. It used to be you could specialize, and now it's like you got to wear
yeah.
just a tower's worth of hats in order to make a living at it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's just super unfortunate. A conversation I have so often around this
Mhm.
stuff with people in the industry and not. Like it's just so disappointing that like usually creative people don't have certain other skill sets,
Mhm.
or even just the it's just something they hate to do. That's why they're creative. They have the creative gene, but it's also they don't want to sit behind a desk and
Hmm.
do marketing or budgeting or all that kind of build websites, whatever. And so it is really disappointing that that's seems so required.
Hmm.
So many people are bad at it, especially the it's a little comical. Like artists, it's one thing artists, like kind of their job is to be on display and put themselves out there and perform.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean social media and all this business stuff is easy for them or fun. But then it's like so many engineers,
We just want to
not
hide
the
behind
most
the desk and turn knobs.
not the most social people.
Yeah.
One of my philosophies is like when I was an assistant, and what I always taught my interns and assistants is like, you're supposed to be invisible. So that means you're not talking, but that also means you've done your job so well that nothing messes up. You're prepared for
Hmm.
possible changes. Obviously, stuff happens, but it's like it's being prepared, doing your job to such a high level that
Hmm.
nobody looks at you because something has gone wrong that you neglected or something like that. Wear all black to kind of blend in. I actually had a producer that required that. um, he did a lot of filming on sessions. So like you're supposed to wear all black. I think he got burned. Some kid wore a bright yellow SpongeBob shirt to a session, and that's when he made the rule. Um, and so, but man, that's a tough question. Mistakes. I don't know. Um,
It
I
can be
guess
little
just
stuff, It can be,
yeah.
like.
Um, I mean, one of the mistakes is maybe thinking that you can get by without doing that stuff.
Hmm.
And you can for a little bit, but eventually you do have to embrace it. And I mean, I'm guilty. I'm terrible on social media, and too, social media is about self promotion now, and
Hmm.
especially in Nashville. Nashville's had a little different mentality than what I've noticed the music industry in other parts of the country as far as self promotion. It's um, it's much easier. Like when I would, uh, don't want to paint with broad brushstrokes here, but usually, the people in Nashville, we're not having conversations and name dropping and talking about all these cool things we did or um, stuff like that. So promoting yourself was almost something this thing that you were told not to do, and it was really looked down upon. And I actually remember when social media first started coming around, there was a drummer in town that he was on it, and
Hmm.
he got really popular. He's a good drummer. Um, got a lot of credits to his name, but he was given a lot of shit for doing the self promotion thing. But now that's like what we're all supposed to be doing.
He was just ahead of the
Um,
curve.
he was ahead of the curve. He was ahead of the curve. But yeah, I would say that would be a mistake. Man, there's either I feel like there's so many. I'm just thinking back to maybe mistakes I've made. I'll say the mistake I've made, the biggest mistake I've made is just, I would say, relying on other people. Um,
In the music industry, that is a terrible decision. Yeah.
yeah, because I just had some situations where, because of my age and the way I was brought up, um, just had this concept of work. So I consider myself a hard worker, and always kind of call myself a company man. Like I'm not gonna take crap, but
Hmm.
I'm there for the team,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna do stuff to help the team, and I assume the team's gonna do stuff to help me. And that's I learned over and over. Well, I didn't learn over and over. I experienced it over and over, and it took me a while to learn that just wasn't the case. So I would have people that I thought were kind of working for me or had my back or something like that. just never doing that. And
Hmm.
I'd bring ideas to the table. It's like, hey, I've got this idea. This is how we can all benefit from it. And that never happened, I felt like, from other people. And then often some of those ideas would be taken and compartmentalized, and not for everyone, but just that person would take the part that benefited them. And
Hmm.
so I think that would be a big mistake, is just relying too much on others. Um, I think maybe one more. This is something I really work on. Um, Meeting deadlines, kind of staying true to your word. You see
Hmm.
it, like production expert. I see this in articles a bunch, and people put this out there a bunch in an industry full of creatives, and time is flexible, and it everybody's running late. Everybody's not meeting deadlines, it seems. So it honestly feels like it's okay if you don't. um, and I've had that mentality. Um, but just trying to work on meeting those giving realistic deadlines is something else
Hmm.
too, instead of trying to give them what I think they want to hear, but give them a more
Yeah.
realistic deadline, and then really sticking to it as best I can, or if I can't, being communicative and letting them know, hey, I know I said end of the week, but this is what's going on.
Under
But
promise and over
still,
deliver. Yeah.
yeah, and still kind of, if that's the case, if it's feasible, I'll work through the weekend to get it done.
Hmm.
Not always. I do try to keep weekend time to personal time and family time. That's something I learned over the years. Um, but yeah, just kind of keeping your word, and it's tough, and especially when there's not that many people doing it. Um,
But it makes
and
you stand out,
so
right? If you're on
it
time.
does.
I had a professor that my best professor in music school was like, early is on time is late.
Hmm.
You will get way more gigs by being early, knowing the material, and not being an asshole than by being
Yeah,
able to shred. And he was
yeah,
totally right. Because I'm a mediocre
absolutely.
bassist. I am
Hmm.
mediocre in every respect of that word when it comes to
Same,
being a bass player. And which is why I started engineering, because I was too lazy to woodshed.
same.
But man, I got a lot of gigs just by like knowing the material, being there early, not being an a-hole. Like
Yeah,
that's so much of it.
yeah. There's one guitar player in town. He's so good, and but I just stopped trying to book him because I
Hmm.
could just never get him. He was either never available, or when I could get him booked, I get bailed on for masters. I don't blame anyone for doing that, but then it just got to the point where, let's say he is better than another guitar player. I don't call him anymore because I don't want to be scrambling for a guitar player the
Hmm.
night before session, or he would never do that. But even 2 weeks before a session or whatever the timeline is, like when I book my musicians, I kind of want to be done and start focusing on how I'm going to produce the song and all these other things you have to deal with,
Hmm.
rather than kind of that unreliability. Not
Yeah.
again, not
Yeah.
that he was unreliable, um, because like I said, it's a business. So if you're gonna take a master, because in Nashville, union scales for musicians.
Hmm.
Everybody kind of gets paid the same, and it's dictated by the musicians union. Um, so that's, in some cases, double, triple, quadruple the money.
Hmm.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't blame you. I'm not mad at you.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But I mean, it's Nashville. You're not exactly hurting for really talented musicians out there. And you can find another
exactly.
guitarist that will get the job done and be reliable. Even if he's 10% worse than this other guy,
Hmm.
he's still freaking amazing, because
It's
Nashville,
funny.
that's one thing about Nashville is everybody out there can rip. Like
Yeah,
every player out there is
it's funny.
so talented.
I often have to make the statement to, like, an intern or a young engineer in the studio or something. Like, me and another engineer, or me and musicians will be talking about musicians.
Mhm.
and our job as producers and engineers is to evaluate people. And
Hmm.
so sometimes it can sound like we're like picking somebody apart, maybe. I never talk negatively about somebody, but if you're talking about maybe somebody's got a better pocket than somebody else, or somebody's,
Hmm.
a little more on the grid, when you're talking about that in the sense of Nashville, we're talking like such a minute difference. Like if this guy is better at playing to a click than the other guy, you know, most people in the world aren't going to hear the difference. But
The
for those of
standards
us
in
who are,
Nashville are incredibly high. Yeah.
yeah, and for those of us who are editing musicians and using live musicians with, like loops and other stuff
Hmm.
like that, is like you do get into like those very small differences of a couple milliseconds of where you place a hit does make a difference.
Hmm.
And I learned drums are a thing that I especially love to record and really geek out on and have tons of opinions on. And I think I'm good at it. And one of the ways that I think I got good was doing so many drum edits for so many other engineers
Hmm.
when I was young. And I just learned what good sound sounded like. And
Hmm.
I'm listening to the drum set as a whole. I'm listening to them soloed. I understand like what a good kick drum sounds like, because we're also committing to tape or committing to Pro Tools.
Hmm.
So it's like, doing stuff after the fact too, but doing some drastic EQing on a kick drum while we're recording it. And so hearing what that sounds like isolated and knowing what's going to sound like in the track. And before Trigger existed, using Sound Replacer,
Hmm.
and all its quirks is like you process. I had a way I'd process it, couple sections, like, yeah, a couple sections of the song at a time, and then I go back and listen. Yeah, I'd line it up, tab to transient, line it up, and go back and listen, because there's always be a hit or two. But you had to get really sharp on hearing a couple milliseconds
Hmm.
delay and kind of how that affected that kick drum. But by listening to one that's locked and locked and locked and locked, and then one that's slightly off, you kind of develop that sense of those like really minute details that you know maybe don't matter
Yeah. Well, I
in the
mean, like,
mix. But
I think they do though. Like, it's funny. I think about this with mic design, right? Because sometimes things are good enough, right?
hmm
But then
hmm
it's learning to recognize when that 1 or 2% really matters, and then it
yeah,
compounds, right? It's like interest in
yeah,
your bank account or investing. Like,
yeah,
okay, I got 2% better with this part change and 3% better with this part change and whatever. And suddenly you've got a mic that's 30 or 40% better, and you've only
yeah,
spent 5 or 10% more on the bill of
hmm
materials, but it takes that obsessive, like borderline autistic attention to detail that I think us
hmm
like audio engineers kind of share. It's because we're passionate about that
hmm
2 milliseconds. And
yeah,
sometimes, man, like that's what makes it.
hmm
Whenever I'm talking with somebody about drums being on the grid, I
hmm
think about those drummers who are so good at pushing or pulling the song back or forth.
yeah,
Um, there's this one song by Echo Belly that's like my pinnacle of dragging drums. It's called I Think About the Bad Times to Get Me Through the Good Times, and the drums just feel so far back at the beat. But man, it is a really really great effect because of that. And if they were right on top of things, it would not have the same feel. Because music's about feelings ultimately, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
You have to check that song out. Yeah, it's interesting. That reminded me of something when I was still an assistant. This is stuck in my head, and you talk about how they're dragging. Yeah,
Mhm.
I talk a lot. I got a friend of mine. He's not really a musician, but he's just really into like creative endeavors and loves art and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So we talk a lot about art and how it's just it's personal taste. And so you're
Mhm.
talking about how it like the drums pull back or drag a little bit, and
Yeah.
like you love that, and maybe that drives somebody else nuts. But I just remember this like talking out of two sides of the mouth almost. I've had the pleasure of working with so many great musicians and especially some musicians that have some amazing history. Like
Hmm.
they've played on some of amazing records or toured with
Hmm.
just like the ultimate musicians and singers and songwriters out there. And so kind of hearing their stories. And when I first started out, there were a lot of musicians just kind of complaining about the state of music and like, man, they just don't make records like they used to. And everything's gridded and everything is this and everything is that. And then I'd hear, I was like, man, have you heard that Stones record? And it's like, man, why did they put it out like that? That bass is just so out of tune.
Hmm.
And they'll point out these and I'll go back. I listen to these old records and I'm hearing these things that are wrong. And but then as a young engineer, as I'm trying to like figure things out, and it's like, well, what is it? Like, can you do
Hmm.
stuff? Because there's so much talk about like letting wrong things happen because it feels right.
Hmm.
But then, somebody's gonna like, oh, they're sharp or they're flat or they're out of time or I don't know. It was that's always like this dichotomy within music is making it perfect enough, but make it imperfect enough that it is perfect.
Yeah. I mean, that I just sent you that song, by the way, the Echo Belly tune.
Yeah, thank you.
I was trying to find it on my Apple Music playlist, and I'm like, I know I have it here. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, like music, we like music because it's imperfect, right? When things are
Hmm.
quantized hard, like it can
Hmm.
sound kind of boring, right? So
Hmm.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a little bit, but I do want to ask you this question, and I've been asking this to everybody lately. Like, what's one thing in the music industry right now that scares the hell out of you and is very concerning? And then also to balance that, because there's a lot of pessimism in the world right now. It is an election year in the US after all.
Hmm.
And what is something that gives you hope in the music industry right now?
Man, something that scares me.
Just one thing,
Um,
because there's a number of them for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know. All this talk about AI is a concern, but I
Mhm.
just I don't I don't think it is. Um, I think it's one of those things that can be disruptive, but AI, like if AI can only we're getting into philosophical concepts here. If AI can only create something from bits and pieces that already exist,
Mhm.
that's currently what it's doing. It's like taking this body of knowledge and they plagiarize and they infringe on copyrights right now. But if
Not
they're
according to them, they
creating
don't. Not according to them, they
now,
don't.
that's
Fair u
because tech people, if you want, yeah, if you want to, there's been some more discussions in genres of music that use sampling, and
Mhm.
you know, I'm all for using other parts of music, but you have to understand that um, it is infringement. Like that's fine, use it, but you got to pay for it,
Mhm.
kind of thing. But yeah, if AI is doing that, then we're either going to get to this point where Um, well, we're getting to the point that there's no new music. If they're the only ones creating music,
Mhm.
then they're not having these life experiences. They're not watching a movie and inspired to write a song. They're not out in nature and inspired to create a sound.
Mhm.
They're not reading a book and take that. And maybe that can be a future for them. That doesn't seem possible based on some of the information that we're talking about now about their abilities. If computers
Mhm.
are just off and on ones and zeros, then they can only co-opt stuff that exists. Um, so like in a way that does, but um, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know if there's anything I'm like truly scared about, like ending the music industry. And I mean, it's already not healthy when you compare it to other like entertainment industries. movies
It's
and
not
video
healthy in
games.
so many ways. From a
It's like
yeah.
the video game industry. There's money there because people. This has always baffled me. People were don't want to pay 99 cents for a song,
Mhm,
or even pay whatever the price is now for Spotify or Apple Music, monthly, like
mhm.
$10 a month or even 15 for all you can drink, you know?
Yeah, it's a
Um,
buffet.
but then people are going out and spending $300-400 on a console and
Mhm,
controllers and skins and all this stuff to play one or two games. People are installing home theaters more often than they're installing, audiophile rooms.
mhm.
So people are willing to spend so much money on other forms of entertainment, it seems, um, but not music. So it already feels so unhealthy. Um, and there's more protections out there. Like when you're talking about, the both the workers and the revenue streams. Not that everybody's getting paid fairly in every single entertainment industry, but
Certainly stronger
you know, we're,
unions in movies than there are
when
in
we're talking yeah when we're
yeah.
talking about like using people's identities in movies and music and all these
Mhm.
different things, it's the movie industry tends to have better protections, and it seems like if the music industry is covered, it's usually because of those advances.
Yeah.
But um
What's something that gives you hope about the music industry? What's something that excites you and you're like, "This is a super cool development that I think is gonna be" it can be small or it can be huge.
yeah, I guess what's really exciting is when you see you can talk about all the negatives of AI and you know consolidation in the music industry and hedge funds buying up catalogs and companies and stuff like that, and music being repetitive and FM dying and consolidation in radio, all these things. You can talk about all those negatives, but there's still so many people wanting to create music and creating good music, and
Mhm.
there's still so much like bad music being created. But that happens everywhere,
Yep.
the cost to entry is so much lower now. And, art in one sense is just a creative outlet for an individual. Doesn't
Mhm.
have to be commercial. We often think of art as needing to be commercial.
It's the system
But
we
that's
live in, right? It's about
mhm,
it's about your output to the economy as opposed
yeah,
to the process and whether or not it sparks joy, to use the
yeah,
Marie Kondo expression, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And so I think that, there is a lot of bad music out there, and then there's a lot of maybe we could call it good music, but what I would call inauthentic because they are doing what's expected of them. And you see this, and I can speak, we're just using country music as an example. I feel like so and so gets popular. So now there's a roadmap. If you're kind of like that person, there's now a roadmap. So you
Mhm.
kind of hone yourself to be like that instead of a lot of advice I try to give to artists. And I think this is applicable for engineers and producers and any creative is just you really need to be yourself. And it's like we all have these relationships in our life, these friends and family that love us and appreciate us for our unique qualities, kind of good and bad. Um, but that's what connects people to us. That's what makes those strong connections.
Mhm.
And so being kind of generic definitely can cast a wide net, but is not going to make us, not going to like just really anchor people to you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you get really personal and really specific, that's where people really lock in. And I also think there's this idea of like you can't get too specific because then only that narrow group of people will understand what you're talking about. When in
Mhm.
reality, when you get so specific, more people understand because we have the ability to apply that to our situations. Like I don't live in the town that you're talking about, but that sounds like my hometown. I didn't date that person that you're talking about dating. That sounds just like my ex. That sounds like
Mhm.
just like I felt when we broke up, even though some of the circumstances are different. Maybe even it's a guy singing about a girl, and then this is a girl feeling this way about a guy. It doesn't have to be this one-to-one correlation. So I really think it's that uniqueness of an individual that's
Mhm.
going to build the audience. The only unfortunate thing is if you're ahead of your time or not accepted for whatever reason, that's got to be so much worse. It's okay
Yeah.
if you failed trying to emulate somebody, but if you fail trying to be yourself, that can be tough.
I
And I
mean,
don't
it
have an
depends on
answer.
how
I
you
don't have an
define
answer.
failure, though, right? Like we're talking about
Yeah,
failure as a version of like the economic outcome of our
yeah,
careers, because that's how we've been trained to think about it
yeah,
in the American music industry.
yeah,
Um, but it depends on what you define as success, right?
yeah.
And for me, I've learned to think about success as embracing the process and embracing the things I
Hmm.
can control,
Yeah,
and what are the
yeah,
little wins. And I
yeah.
mean, what something that you said that really struck me was about inauthenticity, because I think one thing social media has trained in every human being who's on it is we're getting better at recognizing inauthenticity. You can tell
Hmm.
when the video's staged, a lot of
Hmm.
the time or whatever, that they're just staging reels to rack up the follower count or the like count or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that authenticity, when you present your authentic self to people, it's vulnerability, right? Like ultimately, art is a form
hmm.
of vulnerability, but people are drawn to that, man, because we live
Yeah.
in a world that kind of thrives on inauthenticity, and
Hmm.
so that uniqueness is something people are drawn to, just on like a human, like atavistic
Yeah.
level. You know,
Yeah.
at least that's my
S-
hope. That's the optimist in me speaking,
Yeah.
because at the same time, Spotify is finally profitable and they're like, okay, well, we're going to cut like 17% of our staff and cut royalties by whatever percent so that we can
That's how
say to
you
our
become
investors that we're
profitable.
profitable and yada, yada. So like, yeah, there's always bad stuff that's going to happen. But once again, see
Hmm.
how quickly I
Yeah.
slipped right back into the commercial part of music.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so easy because we think about it. We even say the music industry, like we're
Mm-hmm.
building widgets. Even the language we use
Well,
is geared towards that economic perspective.
yeah. A pet peeve of mine, and this is nitpicky, and people are getting into it, is artists are now creating content.
Hmm.
So instead of creating a work of art, it's almost in my mind, it's like you can no longer create a painting. I need you to create this package that I can sell to somebody.
Hmm.
And it's really taken some of the joy and authenticity and creativity out of it. But I also think certain things require more or less authenticity. Uh, just on like more general sense of art, I am drawn. I know a lot of people like this. I'm drawn more towards sad and depressing and heavier stuff.
Hmm. As am I.
And I always say, um, I think that's pretty common. And it's not that I don't like happy stuff. Um, but why I think that is I don't need, and I think most people don't need to know how to cope with happiness.
Mm,
But art,
yeah.
when dealing with death and heartbreak and depression and all these other secret battles that we deal with or public battles we deal with,
Hmm.
that's what art helps us through. What do we connect with musically? We connect with a song at a pretty down point in our life. Some of the songs that stick most in my mind are songs that were kind of on repeat in my head this when I was going through this thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I think so with that type of art needs to be authentic because it's easier to see somebody faking sadness. But
Yeah. Yeah.
more upbeat stuff, more positive, more happy stuff. There's still some authenticity required because fake happiness is also, I think, pretty unattractive.
Hmm.
But I just think it's less authenticity is required because it's not as complex of an emotion as far as like needing help dealing with it. I was like, man, I'm really happy today. Can you help me figure this out? you know, and people was like, man, I'm bummed. I need somebody to talk to.
Yeah, yeah. I've never thought about it that what you said there about like you don't need to be taught how to cope with happiness, but like grief and depression and
Hmm.
struggle and stress, those are the things that, you know,
Yeah.
that we need help to get.
That's why we go to therapy. And that's why
Yeah.
we put a record on
Yeah.
and
I
stuff like
mean,
that.
records
And
are a form of therapy. Hell, like
yeah.
it, we don't
Yeah.
realize it, but it's like this weird,
Hmm.
healthy self-medication to sit
Yeah.
there and be with our emotion instead of shoving
Yeah.
it aside to get to the next screen,
Hmm. But
Yeah,
of course,
I
I've got
mean,
those sugary things in my life that a song that I want to listen to that just like makes me
mhm.
smile and puts me in a good mood, or a TV show, or something
Yeah,
like that. So,
yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that, and I still enjoy them, even though I gravitate towards the sad stuff, um, or contemplative stuff. I think like
Mhm.
one of my favorite songs. I go back and forth. Is it the most optimistic song or the most depressing song? And it's Dock of the Bay, and I
Oh,
think it's
really?
both. I think it's both because it's like musically, there's not an indicator whether it's happy or sad. It's
Mhm.
just kind of even keel, and like the bass line is ostinato, and
I'm
I
reading the
think
lyrics right now. I just pulled them up because I'm like, dang,
whatever you
you're total.
bring
I've
to
never
it,
thought about it that way.
whatever you bring to it, that's what it is. If you're
Hmm.
depressed, it's the song about maybe end of life and just sitting there like life has passed you by. You're just waiting to get on that boat to cross the sea into the next life.
Hmm.
Um, but then some of it's just feels like this really peaceful, just like I'm a people watcher and I love nature and stuff. And so part of it too is just like sitting there like watching the world and being so inspired and content in the simplicity, and just like sitting and doing nothing and observing and taking in. And, um, so it's like that's a happy song for me.
Hmm.
But it's not, you know, it's not super sugary and upbeat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It makes me think. I overthink everything, like I said earlier.
You're an
So
audio engineer. That's like our job
mhm.
description.
I'm an audio engineer with pretty bad ADHD, so it's just like
I feel like those
constantly.
two things, that Venn diagram, it's not a perfect circle, but there's a lot of
Mhm.
overlap there,
There's
you know?
there's got to be the ability to hyper focus on minutia, and being able to conceive so many aspects of a viewpoint, and
Hmm.
yeah, so many, so
I,
much
I think
correlation
I
it
think
seems.
ADHD is just your creative brain uh, hopping in the driver's seat more often than not. I think to some degree. I think that's a
Maybe,
part of
yeah.
it.
Well, it's like, yeah, yeah. That's an interesting way to think about it. It's definitely like chemically, what's different is, um, with an ADHD brain, definitely would lead you towards those
Hmm.
types of things, being creative, because if you're creating less dopamine and serotonin, you need to do things in your life to create more. And um, yeah, a lot of times I get asked about the subject of like hyper focus. Like, how do you listen to the same song over and over and over? Because if you're talking like, if you're with a song from beginning to end, tracking to mixing hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times,
Hmm.
depending. I mean, one song I did like 200 different mix revisions on,
Oh.
um, for basically. The quick story about that is it was a song a band had that was a hit for them, and they weren't like, a top tier artist. I think they were trying to just like gain some ground with this. And so they recorded some versions that just had shout outs to like every NFL team, a dozen baseball teams, a couple like large like markets, like city names, like just a bunch of stuff like that. Um, so that was maybe a little painful, but yeah, you do need that ability to just over and over and not get
Hmm.
tired. Um, which brings up um, something I read years and years ago. There's this, he's an Olympic coach. I think he coached track and field or weightlifting or something like that. And like, what's the key to success? Usually, when you ask like athletes that, some common answers are hard work, you know, something you were born with. There's a lot of just kind of stock answers, but he gave the best one. And it's like the key to success is the ability to do the same thing over and over and over again
Hmm.
and come back the next day and do it again.
Hmm.
Um, and you think about that, like, I've had burnout, but
As have
it's
I.
like
Yeah.
I guess I can think of some singers and some musicians that have incredible talent, but they didn't have the ability to put up with certain aspects of the industry. You talked about all the hats you have to wear. Like sometimes
Hmm.
that kind of precludes people from participating in the industry.
Yep.
It's like you might, and you hear somebody like, man, they're not that great of a singer. How'd they get a record deal? Well, they might not be the best singer, but they're good enough and they show up on time and they know the songs, like what you were saying earlier. They've
And they
got all
know
these
how to
other things.
ingratiate themselves to an audience, and they
Mhm.
know where their niche is.
Yeah,
Like, can
and
you
you can
imagine
you
Nick
can
Drake's
improve on
Pink
that.
Moon getting made these days?
Yeah,
Like, if
yeah.
Nick Drake in the year 2024 never makes a record, you know?
Oh, I've got an interesting that just reminds me of something. I was at an event last week with it was Apogee and um, Guitar Center Pro, and Clear Mountain was there, and he's playing some immersive mixes, and he played um, "The Weight" by the band. Get a load off Fanning, that song, and
No,
really,
I'm
you
I'm
you would know if
probably
you
have
would know it
heard
if
it.
you heard it. You
Yeah,
you
probably.
definitely heard it. It's Most people don't know it by the name, and I'm not going to sing it right now, but
Well, I mean,
um, but I would be surprised if you hadn't heard it. But again,
yeah,
most people don't know by the name. I just couldn't tell if you were messing with me or not. Um,
nope.
but I'm listening to it, and he had played a bunch of stuff he had done, which was great. I'm so on immersive mixing, um, but a lot of his stuff is maybe not my style of music, and
Hmm.
a lot of it has some synthetic stuff to it. I'm like, yeah, this is great. And I always say, like, I wish David Bowie was around to teach us how to do like immersive productions,
Yeah.
because you talk about creativity, he would do
Hmm.
some really cool stuff. But anyway, he played the band, and I must say I'm blown away by this because it's an organic thing, you know, just drums, bass, acoustic guitar, piano, organ. Can't think what else is in there. Um, and I'm also like, this sounds so good. And then I'm thinking about the multi-track a little bit, but not too much. And after he plays it, he's like, I misled you guys a little bit. And he goes to explain like that song was originally recorded on a 4-track. So how did he take a 4-track recording and make it immersive, surround sound, where you have all these different instruments? And on the subject of AI and stuff like
Hmm.
that, this is where AI should be help. It should be helping us, not doing our jobs.
Yeah.
And he's like, I got a friend who's in. He like think he records. He's an engineer, but does a lot of stuff with Hans Zimmer. So he's in the movie industry, and he knows
Hmm.
Peter Jackson. So Bob's talking about like Rick and Peter were over for dinner one night, and just casual. They were talking, and um, they're talking about for the Beatles Get Back movie, they created this technology where they could isolate stuff
Yeah.
within one vocal
Well,
mic.
speaking of dogs,
There's a puppy.
Debo, come here.
Uh,
Oh, I
and
guess not.
so they could hone in on a conversation that was being had. And so Claremont was like, "Do you think you could help me out? I've got this band record that I'm supposed to mix." Peter Jackson's like, "Yeah, send it to my people." And Bob was just explaining, like, he got the tracks back. Everything's separated. You know, the
Mm,
lead singer is the drummer. This is Levon Helm. The lead singer is the drummer. The vocals separated. The reverb that
wow.
was printed in the track is separated. The drums are separated. He didn't go into detail to like, did he have kick and snare separate or whatever?
They
But
separated the
he,
reverb?
yeah, he even
That's
said
insane.
they were able to remove bleed, like separate the bleed. So it sounded like, could be misunderstanding this a little bit, but it sounded like if you have like drum bleed in the acoustic mic, they were able to remove the drum bleed in the acoustic mic and either apply it to the drums or remove it.
Mhm.
But it sounded like then he had this track of drum bleed and acoustic mic and acoustic, like those
That's
had been
crazy.
separated.
That's
Um,
crazy.
so I again, I don't know if it got down to that minutia, but he was definitely talking about how they were removing bleed from mics and things like that. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but just like a cool story that blew my mind. Like the amount of creativity and brain power between those individuals who are just um, so respected and good at what they do as far as making movies and you know, creating and mixing music and stuff like that. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
mind blowing.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
so cool. So here's the part where I have to do that whole little self-promotion thing, and then I'll let you go because you've been real good about going over time here because we found a bunch of
So
interesting stuff to talk about.
I'll
So
talk all
you
day
were one
about
of
this
the
stuff.
first people, I think, one of the first more successful engineers who really fell in love with our V1 kit with the lollies.
Hmm.
And I remember you telling me specifically about doing bridge neck with the lolly on
Hmm.
the bridge and the
Hmm.
small diaphragm capsule. I don't remember if it was
Hmm.
cardioid or something on the neck.
Hmm.
What is it you like about those mics? How does it help your creative process as a tool? Oh, that right. I installed
Yeah, yeah,
Sennheiser
yeah,
now. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So thumbs up, I guess.
Yeah, I experimented a couple things with, you know, in Nashville, acoustic guitar is an important instrument,
Hmm.
and treated much differently than it exists in other genres. Um, and I was just looking for, I had a setup. It's like as I was kind of like developing my own sounds on a couple things, I would slowly, as I developed, just try a couple things. Keep so much stuff standard,
Hmm.
and then just try out a couple things and see how I felt. And I was on the hunt for some acoustic mics. I wasn't getting some of the engineers I learned from being a little older than me. They were creating country music just that had a different sound, and this was a
Hmm.
time where country music was swinging in a more specific sonic direction. And while it sounded great, I was like, this just isn't right all of the time.
Hmm.
So searching for something very specific, and I was trying a couple new mic manufacturers came on the market around the same time, and I was trying them out, and I won't mention any other names. All good
You can.
mics.
We're not competitors. We're all
Um,
just making tools, you know.
yeah, yeah. Well, I hesitate to say that because sometimes people hear something like, "Oh, this mic is better than that," and they think it's better at everything, and
Hmm.
that's just not the case. Like
No, not at all.
you guys make great mics, and I've done shootouts with your stuff, and sometimes it wins and sometimes it doesn't. But that's the
Hmm.
nature of physics and kind of what we do and why
Hmm.
we experiment and shoot out and things like that. But there were some loaners in town, and a buddy was like, you should try these. So I tried them instantly. The sound that I had been looking for. Um, and I was in the market for some mics. I was evaluating some small diaphragm condensers, which I almost never use,
Hmm.
and like really reluctant to spend money on them. And
Hmm.
so the V1 plus Lolly, it's like, okay, with the Lolly, it's got what I want, and then I also have the option of going SDC if I want to.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, it was just like to me, that's just the V1 and Lolly is just like such a good Swiss Army knife. And I always say, you know how people like the 414 because it's good on pretty much everything.
Hmm.
That's the same thing with a Lolly, but to me, it feels a little better on most things than the 414. The 414 is a little darker. This just feels a little more exciting, not sacrificing low end response necessarily, but it just feels more modern.
Hmm.
Um, and 414s vary so much anyway, so that's kind of a hard discussion to
It
have.
depends
But
on which model you're talking about, right?
yeah,
Like if you want to make a
exactly.
record sound like vanilla cake with mayonnaise frosting, there's certain versions of
Hmm.
the 414. You just throw one of those
Yeah,
through any old preamp, and that's what you'll get. Then there's other
yeah,
versions that blow your socks off, you know?
yeah. So just like fit the need. I'm really big on, I had a producer that I worked with. He's very successful, had a lot of money, a lot of great gear. Got the name brand gear. He's got the Telefunken 251, this really
Hmm.
expensive Martin guitar, amazing gear, similar to some other studios in town, but this was just like an individual. And I bring a lot of gear with me when I go to sessions. And when I do sessions, I like to use whatever gear a studio has, but there's some things that I can't leave up to chance. I need to know what it
Hmm.
sounds like. Like if I put acoustic guitar is one of those. I've got a mic and a pre and an EQ that I use, and I know if it sounds different, then there's something going on. Like, maybe this is the room, maybe I need to move the mic rather than like, is this a mic placement thing or is this I
Yeah.
don't know the room or that kind of thing. um, and he said, because there's another ribbon mic manufacturer here in Nashville who I love who makes great mics
Stager,
and they're
yeah?
affordable. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Matt
great.
Stager and and Vanguard and Stager are just making really good quality mics that are affordable. You guys have some higher end stuff too, but that I love the Lolly, like that whole kit. It's two large diaphragm condensers and small diaphragm condensers. Um, I don't know what the price point was. I don't know what it is now, but it was just super affordable. And just since I've started using it, like that's one of the compliments I get consistently is my acoustic guitar sound. There's a couple things um, that I think I do well, um, but that's I don't know if I'd put that in that category, but that is one I get feedback on a lot, and it's a simple channel. It's actually what I do mostly now is I've got a stereo bar. I put my
Mhm.
V1 next to a Stager SR. He made these, I think they're called SR66s now. That it's one of his more recent mics. It looks like a Royer almost, like it's circular.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, there's so many other differences, but if anybody's familiar with his mics, this is a uniquely shaped one compared to his other stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't know what prompted him to do this. I know I had a conversation with him. He's been really good about loaning me prototypes and stuff like that. And we had a conversation years ago after using another company's ribbon mic. It's like I really like it, and he doesn't like that mic. He has some negative opinions about it. I said I
Us
like
mic
whatever.
manufacturers usually do.
Yeah, and it's like whatever issues you have with it, I put it on a mono overhead, and it's just like all other ribbon mics just don't have that top end,
Hmm.
and this was right for an overhead mic, and and then it was not too long after that that this mic came out, and it's voiced a little bit brighter than like his SR2, which I love and I use on electric guitars in conjunction with a 57 to add some bottom end and some girth to it, and use them on some room and some drum stuff too. But anyway, so the V1 Lolly and the SR66, I think it is, pointed right at the 12th fret or about in there, and then I run them through two Cappy pre's.
Hmm.
It's changed over the years, but Jeff Steiger's a friend of mine. We became friends because I like his gear so much. But it was a VP312. Now it's the Hyder H2s. He's got the second iteration of the Hyders, and I got number 1 and 2 of the pink ones. So that's my channel, and then some Kush Electra EQs, which are also super affordable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, some engineers are running like a $50,000 channel, and I'm running 2 channels at like, a couple grand.
Hey
So
man,
it's I mean, that's still a lot of
yeah,
money, but it's a lot of
yeah.
pieces. But individually, the pieces are, in my opinion, some of the strongest pieces in that category at some of the lowest prices in that category.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal of a lot of successful newer
Hmm.
manufacturers is you have to be providing value, right? Because not everybody does the thing that old studios used to do with like 50 mics in their locker that are just for vocals or whatever,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
this mic that I fixed, it's
Hmm.
probably the invoice to the company that I fixed it for is going to be $400 or $500, but this is vintage 87, the one with the battery
Hmm.
compartment in it.
Hmm.
What is this, 6 to 10 grand, depending on the condition,
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
one mic, right?
Yeah.
You could buy like 10 of our V4s for that minimum price, for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
lowest price and have
Yeah.
a lot of versatility in that sense. So I
Yeah.
think just the way the music industry has gone, like you said, the barrier to entry is lower. And because of that,
Hmm.
manufacturers have been forced, and in my opinion, it's a good thing to provide things that are not only competitively priced, but
Hmm.
also arguably better tools, like
Yeah.
more modern tools that are going to be more reliable, more, hopefully more useful, lower noise, obviously, because components
Yeah.
when this was made were not low noise at all,
Yeah.
so it's just that sort of thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's being a manufacturer. It's an interesting time to be a manufacturer in pro audio right
Hmm.
now. Let me put it that
It's
way.
got to
There's
be
a lot of
tough.
people doing it. It is tough. I'm not going to lie. There's a reason I'm doing mic side hustle mic repair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but it's rewarding too, because I tell people, like, I essentially make paintbrushes and you guys paint the paintings, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, my goal is to make a tool that's helpful for you, and I'm glad that the V1
Yeah.
Plus Lolly is something where you go, oh, this makes my job easier or more creative or more
Hmm.
reliable, or it's whatever it does for you. I'm just glad that it
Hmm.
helps you make good art, because that's my
Yeah.
job. So,
Yeah.
well, on
And
that
it's
note,
and
dude.
I
Oh, go
well,
ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to say I discuss acoustic a lot, but I use it on so many other things. So it's definitely not a one trick pony. Um, and kind of what you said, going back to something you said earlier about like what is the definition of success, and you talk about like for you, you're creating paintbrushes. Like this is that we just try to create that thing that makes us happy, and then we know
Hmm.
that adds value, and it doesn't have to, you don't have to take over Neumann's market share,
Hmm.
but maybe knowing that like you create good products for you or good music for me, whether it's a number one that week on the charts, doesn't make my mix or my production any more or less valid. And especially in Nashville too. So many, we talked about the musicians, so many great engineers and producers that you've
Hmm.
never heard of that
Hmm.
are so good. Some people have won Grammys that I would say are maybe not as good, just depending on category or whatever. Not trying to take anything away from somebody, but just the talent level. And so it's like that commercial success, whether it's having your name known or on a Waves plug-in bundle, or certain monetary things, like that's not that's nice and that helps
Hmm.
pay the bills, but that's not success. It's about creating,
Yeah.
and I think that's you kind of pointed out that's the best example. Just like create something good that people can use and makes people's life better and easier, happier, or able to cope with the sadness more.
Are we making the world slightly brighter or better or
Mm-hmm.
more deeper
Mm-hmm.
place
Yeah.
by doing what we do? And if we're not, then we
Yeah.
need to hopefully we need to re-examine that.
Hmm.
We need to re-examine what we're doing and
Yeah.
go, how can we do that for others and for ourselves, So that's a good note to close on, I think. I appreciate your hour
Yeah.
and a half, man. This
Of
went way
course. This
longer,
has been
but
a blast.
I really enjoyed it, man. And I was looking at this photo just now. I realized between the two of us, we have one original colored beard
Yeah.
because you've got the middle covered, I've got the outers
Hmm.
covered. So we
Yeah.
should, yeah. But next time I'm in Nashville, I'll come knock on your door and hopefully see a completed studio.
Yeah. Hopefully give me a couple years, but yeah.
Well, thanks again, and we'll see everybody next